I don't. I exercise.
I've always seen you and I haven't recognized you. No, it's not. I don't sit over there as often as I would like.
I would love to.
Thank you for the pen.
Welcome.
Okay.
Yeah.
You said we're up to.
We're on, Brandon.
All right, I'm gaveling to order this April 25th, 2024 meeting of the Lexington Planning Commission at the Rockbridge County Administrative Offices at 5 p.m. with all commissioners present and seated. Do we have an approval of the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Good. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Unanimous. The minutes from the April 11th meeting. If you've had a chance to look at the minutes. You feel,
Because we are the luckiest planning commission to have such a good minute writer.
hold the microphone closer, John, to make sure it gets
Move to
recorded.
approve the minutes as presented.
Make sure we get that on the record.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. Citizens' comments on matters not on the agenda. Only the press in attendance. We will shut the citizens' comments on matters on the agenda. Move on to new business. We'll have two orders of new business, and I think that I don't think we will be here for a long period this evening. So we'll go with our first, our ZOA 2024-02, our annual zoning ordinance amendments, batch B, so-called mobile restaurants. Arnie, take it away.
For our mobile restaurant zoning text amendment, what we've provided to you this evening in your packet is the existing rules and regulations that we have, including the use matrix, the use and design standards that we have currently for mobile restaurants, as well as a definition. And over the last couple of meetings, particularly last one, you reviewed and had a couple of tweaks. So those are included on page 7. So your planning commission recommendation after your meeting on the 11th of April. And you will notice that the note that follows the use matrix, note number 5, does include the word "and" there as suggested. And the bigger item there is the fact that it is a by right use, but with the note in Parks and Open Space. And the note says mobile restaurants only allowed in Jordan's Point Park or Brubaker Park Sports Complex, and with a written agreement with the city of Lexington. Then for our use and design standards, beginning there on the bottom of page 7 of your entire packet and running over to the next page, the major change overall, not just what you did at your last meeting, is the fact that we're adding to the mobile restaurant use and design standards that a mobile restaurant may operate in Jordan's Point Park or Brubaker Field Sports Complex with a written agreement with the city of Lexington. And then as an ancillary thing, while we were reviewing that language, also noticed that we could do a little bit of a cleanup or an improvement to subsection I that requires trash receptacles to be disposed of properly off-site by the mobile restaurant operator. And that's all I have for a presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Arnie on the substance of that presentation? No? Okay. Public comment period opened and duly closed. Now, is there any further discussion? Do we think we've hit all the points we want to hit? We've got the text in place as we want it.
Yes.
Okay. Would anyone like to take us to an amendment or a motion?
I move that we approve the ZOA 2024-02 annual zoning ordinance amendments batch B mobile restaurants as presented. Does it need anything more than that?
Sounds good. If someone wants to second it.
Second.
And a motion and a second. Are we all good with this before we call to a vote? Yes, okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? All right, off to city council it goes.
Just for your information, because we haven't been able to schedule for batch A, all the individual items, I think there were 15 or 16. Intended to schedule with city council a work session that hasn't been able to be done because we're trying to find another partner to share a work session. So what I'm planning on doing is just putting this in with batch A and advertising that as one. So you won't see them separately. If you look in the newspaper, it was going to be advertised as one when it goes to council.
Okay,
How is that going to be advertised? Just curious.
Only with a newspaper advertisement. So we don't do any postings if that's
But
the
I mean,
question.
Is it going to say this is going to be discussed at city council? Is that how it's going to read? Okay.
It'll be a typical advertisement for us in the sense that it will have the date and the plan or the city council meeting. And then it has to provide at least a summary of what each of the individual items are that are going to be discussed. So it's a fairly lengthy ad for us because it's 16 or 17 items.
Work session advertising? I just want to know how it was going to be advertised in general. So work session, yes or no?
Work session will, if you keep up with the city council meeting packets and also with Janie's email blast, you'll be made aware of it through that mechanism. But the work session, this item will not be specifically advertised separately from just whatever's on a work session, if that makes sense. So if you keep up with council and the emails that Janie sends out as our city clerk, then you'll be made aware that there will be a work session held normally the day of a council meeting, just an hour or so earlier.
and that's for council to, just for you to present all of these to council and
I
talk.
could not in good conscience just show up with 15 items at a
Yeah.
public hearing and say,
Yeah.
hey,
Yeah, right.
consider this. So we're going to try to schedule that work session just to give them some background on each of the items that are being proposed.
Yeah. It's that section in the News Gazette that no one reads until they get on one of these,
You read
one
it
of
all.
these boards. I'm sorry,
Did you
so
say when it was gonna be, the work session? Okay, then
Haven't
you
been
haven't
able to
scheduled
work.
it yet.
The mayor preferred that this be partnered with something else on a work session, and we haven't found that yet.
Oh,
And then y'all have held so many work sessions recently.
yeah,
Thought we'd give you a little break.
thank you.
not that it's burdensome to be on city council. Okay. All right then, new business B, which is zoning amendment 2024-03, which is a discussion of cottage housing. So we are not deciding anything tonight. This is really like the first step in us trying to wrap our heads around what we're talking about with cottage housing and where we want to go with it. So Arnie will take it away.
Okay, thank
We
you.
have
This
it up
is-
on the screen too.
This is an overview. So for our presentation, just quickly, a background section, examples of other cottage housing projects, policy questions and next steps. And mind you, next steps is a question because there's nothing there, but that's for us to determine. Kate, if you could. So a little bit of a review. Zoning ordinances typically don't allow the things that we used to allow. So the zoning, since our comprehensive plan update in 2020, we decided to follow a couple of zoning or use a couple of our zoning tools. And the first one, following land use chapter and strategy number 5.4, was to explore the creation of a new planned unit development zoning district focused on unique and flexible mixed residential development. And as you know, we did that. We have a new PDMU mixed use zoning district. So that will allow additional housing units potentially to be developed along our commercial zoning districts out East Nelson and South Main Street if somebody decides to do a redevelopment project out there. And then the next is a housing strategy 1.2 for ADUs. As you know, we just completed that. We're still waiting for our first conditional use permit application for a detached ADU, but we have had some inquiries. And then now for the third item, what we're working on is a housing strategy 5.3 that talks about exploring and modifying the zoning ordinance for smaller lots, attached units, and other housing types that achieve higher densities and a diversity of housing options. And cottage housing certainly fits within that strategy, within that definition. And I've also passed around a book that you're welcome to borrow at any time if you like, that gives a great overview of cottage housing or pocket neighborhoods. These things are called a number of different things, but we're going to stick, I think, with cottage housing. Further explanation of this slide gets used a lot. What we typically see because of zoning and also to a degree because of financing mechanisms, we don't have that middle anymore. So it's called the missing middle. We have zoning that allows single family, we have zoning that allows multifamily, and we have finance mechanisms that are primarily set up for those two. But over time, we have really lost that middle. So everything that includes duplexes, triplexes, bungalow courts, townhouses to a degree, live work dwellings. So all the things that made some of our older cities sort of rich with diversity, we don't really allow anymore. And zoning is primarily to blame, not just partly, but primarily to blame for that. So that's why we're using some of our zoning tools to allow some of that diversity back. And cottage housing is one of the typologies for that. So what is cottage housing? Cottage housing is typically a group of small single-family dwellings clustered around a common area. What you see there, some of the simple or characteristics are smaller units, roughly double what you would normally be allowed in the underlying zoning district. But there would be limitations on the size, on the height. You typically have internal pedestrian paths. There's common area. I think it's also typical, you know, I'm not 100% sure that this is a condominium style project. So you buy your structure, you buy the land under your structure, and you probably buy a little bit more that ends up being your property that you have control of. And then you're also buying into the common area and the common open space, the parking and all that as typical condominium style development. So other characteristics, increase of density, smaller units, shared common area, shared ownership, again, condominium style for the most part. I'm not sure how else these would be done, but I'm certainly aware that ones I've looked into are condominium style. The corralling of the car is not the primary thing that sits directly in front of your house. So you pull off the street and it's the primary element that's sort of banished to a degree. It's over on the side. It's screened largely from public view. And then there are connected internal paths. Yes, you're going to have to walk a little bit to get from your parking space over to your house, but that also fosters a sense of community that we lack in a lot of suburban style development. Then you also have porches facing the commons, and then if you have eyes on the commons, that's another term, or eyes on the street, then you have people actually actively observing and they know what's going on. A big problem that we have in suburbia is snout houses, the double car garages on the front side and the people live in the back, and they never see what's going on the street. So that you don't know when your golf clubs are getting stolen out of your garage because you never see the person come and go. So this idea of having a greater security because you have more eyes, you have more observation points onto that common area, you have a better sense of who's coming and going. And then the last thing there is layering spaces from public to private. In our current development pattern, you sort of drive off the public street and you're on your private property, and there's not much of a transition before you walk into your house, and then that's then your own world. You have your own gym, you have your own bar, you never need to leave. But this is a little bit different in the sense that you sort of drive in, the parking is over to the side, you're still in public space, but there's a transition as you walk through the common area. It's still public, but not overall public, more public for just the community. And then you go through your gate or past your fence and you're in semi-private space at that point. And then the porch as well is semi-private, and then you are inside your unit and it's private at that point. So this is more of a more steps in that transition from public to private space.
And when you say it's condominium style, do you mean more in terms of there's an HOA to maintain the common areas?
And there has to be, because I haven't looked at it directly, but there has to be, simply because we're talking about not just common open area, but we're also talking in some cases buildings. If there's a common house where there's a kitchen that's shared, or one or two of them I've read have extra bedrooms. So if you need bedroom space, you can reserve. So there's going to be some maintenance and some oversight needed and management needed for those things. So I can only imagine that it would be a small HOA.
Yeah.
But yes. And then just to provide you with some quick examples, you see these in the book that's going around as well. This is another project by Ross Chapin. You'll hear that name a number of times. He is an architect in the Pacific Northwest who has really pioneered this for the most part. This is one of his designs. And just to go through it quickly, you clearly see the common open area. You see cottages around that 1.5 story in height. You see the parking up on the northern end or the top part there as you drive in. And this is a little bit of a hybrid. The 3 cottages that are on the left-hand most side, they actually have rear loaded garages. So those are actually garages underneath because they're able to come in from the backside. So it's a little bit of a hybrid in that sense. Any questions so far? I shouldn't just be blabbering on without asking.
What about owner occupied only, or are they going to allow rentals?
That's a good question. I haven't looked at like a set of covenants and restrictions yet to see whether or not that would be allowed. I don't think that it would necessarily be a problem for long-term rentals, but the short-term rental thing, I think we would have to revisit. Certainly. Yeah. And then just a couple of quick examples from one particular source, the Cottage Company. And these are all in the Pacific Northwest around Seattle area, just to give you a sense of what some of them can look like. Also size. So this one has an average unit size of 961 square feet, because we're going to have to start thinking sort of density. Yep. What do we allow now? Are we going to go with double? Because that's sort of the thumb rule of what these are. What's the maximum size? What's the maximum height? So we had 961 here, and the next slide we'll have an example of larger cottages in the 1,500 to 1,700 square foot in another design. And then the next one, I think, comes down again to 990. Again, just a quick review of what some of these can look like. And the next one, I think, is in the same 900 or so. Oh, and then the next one, we actually get to a local example. Thornhill Road just happens to have a 1.37 acre parcel there that's been vacant since I've been here. And on the wall in the planning office, we had, and just to maybe orient you a little bit more here, it has frontage on Thornhill Road, as I mentioned, at 915, and it also has access to the backside to Providence Place. And this is just, if you're heading out of town, this is just before you get to Weatherburn. So Weatherburn's on the left, and this is the vacant parcel on the right, and it rises up the hill back towards Providence Place. Yep. And on the next slide, we happen to have a design for that property from, of all people, Ross Chapin.
No kidding.
Tony, I can't remember, Waddell, thank you. I was going to say it's Tony Stewart. I knew that was wrong. Tony Waddell had hired Ross Chapin to do this design. And it was hanging on the wall, as I mentioned. And then Mr. Waddell came in and had another version of this, which really didn't meet the criteria or the characteristics of a cottage housing design. And it was way over the number of units that we would allow. So that project didn't go forward, and this property is still vacant. But it's a good example of something here local by the preeminent architect for this type of project. And coming off of Thornhill, you'll notice one access point with parking spaces for 3 cottages. And then it transitions into an open space, and then additional cottages with additional open space, and the parking is always on the periphery. So it does follow the typical characteristics. And with a quick bit of math before I came here, and which is why you're not going to have a zoning report, this would allow 3.9 something houses on this 1.37 acres with a 15,000 minimum square foot minimum lot size in the R2 zoning district. So with our conventional zoning that's on that property now, we would have allowed 3.9 dwelling units on that property.
So around it.
Presuming that the minimum lot width and the driveways and all of that could have been accommodated, which is still a big question. But just to give you a rough calculation, and this is again is double. So these tend to be double the density of what is allowed, but then you make the house size smaller. You make there become an open area that they all share. And again, one of the bigger benefits is security and community, sense of community.
And it looks like the garages are communal that several houses share. Is that right?
My guess, just from counting the number of spaces, is each person's going to have at least one assigned to them.
Okay, but then are there two garages or
You
there's?
see the garage.
It looks
The
like,
Oh, I see
upper
it.
right, and
These
upper
two
left
don't
are
have-
garages. Those aren't cottages.
these ones
Yeah,
don't seem to
yeah,
have a
yeah.
garage, these
Okay.
do. They're,
Okay.
because they're three here.
Yeah.
two here.
Then on the front side on Thornhill, there are
Looks like
parking spaces. There's
space for
not,
5 cars and
structure.
5 homes.
They have here, and the.
so the ones I've noticed now that I've done an accurate count, but there tend to be at least one parking space for each unit. And then there might be a few extra for visitors. And I think that's what we see here, even though the ones that are closest to Thornhill, you have a few extra. You don't have just the 3 for the cottages, 6, 7, and 8. You have a couple extra parking spaces there. And actually, that's true in the backside too. You have enough for each person to have a covered space, and then you have a little bit of that extra in between the 2 parking garages for community.
Oh, they actually say they have parking under the houses,
Yeah.
6, 7, and 8.
It's
It's
under
written
7 and 8?
in tiny little letters.
It's an option. Does it say option?
No, it says
It's used to that.
houses with parking under entry on half level.
Wow.
And that's because it's going uphill to such a degree that they could potentially tuck in that situation, the parking underneath.
So it looks like then each of these houses would have one spot and then there are these extra parking area over on the right-hand side.
So they all have a garage?
Sorry, I'm looking at it in a different direction. At the bottom, there are 5 parking spots at the bottom.
Mhm.
And this is also a sketch. It's not quite site plan level detail, but at a sketch level, at least, plenty of room for parking for all the units, I would say.
You're saying these look like parking
These
spots?
are, yeah.
Oh,
And there's.
Marty, I have a
parking spots
question.
Over
How
here.
does something like
the
this
garage?
differ from the Weatherburn subdivision? How does this differ?
Weatherburn was a planned unit development overlay at the time. Now, PD is, well, actually, PD is different now. So at that time it was a overlay district and they came in with their plan. They said, this is what we want to build. Mind you, at that time it was different than what we have now, because at that time it was all duplexes. Must have been 52 units total. So they came in with a plan and said, this is what we want to do. It does not meet your minimum lot size. It does not meet your minimum lot width. And we want to do a one-way street. And since it was all came in as a planned, designed project, it was reviewed that way. And because we had the flexibility in the PUD zoning, it was accepted that way. So they had pretty significant reductions in side yard setbacks. I want to say side yards are maybe 5 feet. The front yard setbacks are 10 feet. And I can't remember what the rear happens to be. But because they showed it all up front, basically did a site plan level design and it was accepted, that's how that was approved. Now it's a little bit different than we're talking here because the design is a little bit different. In Weatherburn, it's still a single lot. At that time, it would have been duplexes, but that has changed over time. You still have the 3 or 4 duplexes that were done by the original developer, and then the second developer came in and changed the PUD. Actually, they changed the PUD multiple times, as you know. And now there's single family houses, all the remaining ones on individual lots with their front loaded. So not much different than in any other suburban style subdivision, except they're a good bit tighter. There's some density there. But that was all done through a planned unit development zoning.
Yeah, I don't see a big difference between a plan like this and the PUD though. I don't understand what the difference is at this point.
That PUD, we're still dealing with a driveway or a street, even though it's private in that area. You're still pulling straight off the street into your own parcel, into your own driveway, and into your own garage.
Okay.
And those are regular sized houses, as opposed to something, what we're trying to do is allow higher density than what we can normally do. And yes, they got higher density at Weatherburn, there's no doubt, than what you can normally do on an R2 zone parcel, but that was allowed through the PUD. The other thing to note perhaps is Weatherburn has 52 units. We would not allow 52 units in a one pod cottage housing because there's some guidance between 8 and 16. I can't remember the exact numbers. If you have too many people in a pod, then you lose the sense of community.
Mhm.
You're not going to know everybody. So we would never do a 52 unit pod. What they would suggest is you break it up into separate pods. If you have enough acreage, which I don't think we're going to have that kind of acreage again, you would do you would design it as different pods with, between 6 and 12 or 6 and 16 units together. So we're not going to have that great big pod that you might consider Weatherburn to be. And then Weatherburn has some common open area, so that's a commonality. So some of the benefits, we've already covered some of these. Increasing housing supply, we're all suffering from that across this entire country. Zoning is certainly to blame for that. There are some other inputs that are to blame. Finance, just lack of land area. And then your variety that we already talked about. For the most part, we're only building in this country single family detached houses and apartment complexes, where that middle certainly is missing. So this is another type of house that somebody might like if they're not into an apartment or into a detached single family house. And hopefully increase housing affordability. More units should increase that. They shouldn't be as expensive as a regular house because they are smaller. Now, sort of the trade-off there would be how much design do we want to impose? Right. The more design details, the more expensive these are going to be. But that's just a trade-off that we're going to have to work through when we get further down the line and talk about design and how much design oversight we're going to want. And then just increased sense of community. I don't know about you, but I'm an introvert. When I go home, I really don't talk to my neighbors unless I sort of see them in the side yard. And I think that's just sort of a function of the way our subdivision is laid out and a function of how I operate. But this is going to be a little bit different. It is intended to foster a greater sense of community because you have to park on the side. You have to walk to your space. You're going to walk directly in front of somebody else's house. The mailbox kiosk isn't going to be right beside the car. It's going to be someplace else where you have to run into your neighbors by design. There are going to be community events there. It doesn't have to have a community house necessarily, but some of these have a structure where they share meals if that's something that's important to them. Or maybe even, as I mentioned before, they have an extra spare bedroom that you can rent out or have access to as needed.
How do you zone this? I mean, yeah. And if you're going to do that later, I'll wait. I picture it.
I don't know yet.
Okay.
But it could easily be PD cottage housing.
Okay. Yeah.
We left that open with our sort of nomenclature with planned developments, or it could just be a cottage housing zoning district, just as simple as that. And then we have all these standards, a minimum lot size overall, because you don't want one so small that you can't get enough of these in for a sense of community. You don't want it so large that nobody's ever going to build one here because they can't put that acreage together.
Mhm.
So it could be its own zoning district as well.
And that's a good question from Leslie, because it's, and the other part of that is the where we would allow that zoning to. Because I remember when we were talking at PDMU, we didn't nail that down early in our discussions, and then we came around to saying, no, it's only in the C2 area. So I think that'll be part of that's part of Arnie's next set of questions.
So the next one's sort of about policy questions. Certainly, we don't have to answer these tonight, but just as we're going through the process, things to think about. What should be the maximum size of the dwelling unit? How much parking are we going to require? Where is it located? Attached, detached, carport, surface lots, those types of things. And also sort of the difference between what we might need for each unit versus what we might need for visitors. And to what degree should design be regulated? I just mentioned we want it to fit in with our neighborhood, so I think we want some design control over this. But if we make it to such a degree that we want exactly what's in some of these photographs, I think they're going to be rather expensive. So we have to find that balance here. And then how does it fit in with other single family developments that are inevitably going to be next door? This is going to be something inserted into a pattern that already exists. But we have to sort of take that pain of, yes, it's something that exists and this is new. And there's going to be some friction, but we're trying to create something new. We're trying to provide a different type of housing product and also at a higher density than what people are used to.
If we could go back to the benefit slide, because there was one in that handout that I passed around. You look at on the second page under conclusion, I think another benefit is that this point, the U.S. has experienced a shift in demographics where the majority of households are now 1- and 2-person households. So in a way, we're responding to our household characteristics.
And then, as it was mentioned several times before, certainly during ADUs, if somebody doesn't want to keep up their house anymore, they're elderly, they're single perhaps, they move into the ADU or they move into a cottage house. And then that frees up their single family detached house for an actual family.
Yep.
So then last slide that I had provided to you in your packet was sort of next steps. What I'm prepared to do or we can do is just provide you in there during the next meeting or for the next meeting, a set of regulations from Winchester.
Oh.
As just something that's here in Virginia. There's another one that we found in Falls Church, but just to provide you with something. I think last time, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I would love your input. We sort of went through the elements of ADUs, sort of maybe painfully, I don't know. And then we did that piecemeal. I'm not sure if something like this, if it might be better to see another set of regulations and then just sort of go through them a little bit more holistically as opposed to, but we can change after I present that to you and we mull it over a little bit and have a discussion. But that's what we can do for the next meeting, if it's acceptable, is to present that set of regulations from Winchester. So in your next packet, you would just have the Winchester regulations. There might be some highlighting the things that we need to think about, but actually we need to think about the whole thing. So the whole thing would be highlighted. So that would be my suggestion, unless you have any other suggestions on how to move forward for our next steps.
Would there be any other small communities like Lexington that we could compare with rather than these larger places, that are much, much larger than Lexington?
The cottage housing thing is fairly new. It sort of started in the Pacific Northwest and it's filtered to other places. I did a research and it's been a while. I'll admit that. The only one I could find at that time was Winchester. And I can't remember how big Winchester is. It's certainly bigger than we are, but I could not find anything for a community our size. And then the other one I was found more recently was Falls Church. Again, not a community our size. But I think the overall characteristics of this, I'm not so sure that we have to worry about, hey, we're picking something from a completely urban area. I think these really will translate well to some place that's our size.
Is it worth looking at some, you said that the Pacific Northwest is home to cottage housing. There must be smaller communities there. I'm curious too, to see, because I imagine that in a larger community, they're not going to care as much about those design elements, whereas in a smaller community, they might. I don't know.
That's a nice segue. Thank you. Next steps is the last thing that was provided in your packet, but today, and this is why you're not going to get a zoning report, there are a couple extra slides added to our presentation.
Can we, before we leave the policy questions, can we,
Oh yeah, sure.
yeah, just or maybe it's like the checklist that we're looking at, so what would be the maximum size of the dwelling unit, and the other one is what would be the maximum lot sizes?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one to add, and.
This isn't all inclusive.
No, but I'm just, and then the other one is, maybe the where question, where we would be allowing it.
Mhm.
And then the last quick thing is just to say, I know you're going to show us more, but I really appreciated this presentation and you're leading off with a comp plan. Thank you, Ronnie.
And at this time, we still don't have someone interested in doing cottage housing in the near future, do we?
We have one person that supplied us with an application a while back, and I
Right.
think he's still interested,
Okay,
but not to prove. Now that we're doing it, he doesn't have to submit an application. We're just going to run with it. And I
Yeah.
think that's now worked with his modified time frame.
it's nice to know that this, instead of just putting an ordinance or putting this together to sit on the shelf, I think it's a little motivating to know that somebody is kind of interested in doing it. so.
I haven't
Sure.
checked back with Max Ivankov recently, but it's my understanding that he's still interested. And I suggested to him a while ago that before he comes back with an updated or a full proposal for cottage housing, that he at least clear off his lot. And he knows that we were going to pick this up and he's cleared off his lot. So to me, that's at least an indication that maybe he's still interested. But I can certainly reach out to him during this process to see.
Which lot is this?
Walker
Yeah,
and
yeah, I know that lot.
Houston.
How big a lot is that? How big a lot is it?
We'll
back
get to
to
that
where
in
it
just
is.
one
Oh, good.
moment. So this is another example or a potential location. So
Okay.
location, 201 North Randolph Street. Have not had any communications whatsoever with the property owner. This is the burnt out house that was torn down recently. And it is a property that is 140 feet roughly in width and 250 feet roughly in depth, just to give you some idea of size. That happens to coincide very well with Langley, Washington. I don't know how big Langley is, but it's on Whidbey Island. It's not a large community. It's small. This is the first project done by Ross Chapin and some other folks. And it would have allowed 4 houses on this property. And what I should have led it in with, this property is 120 feet by 240 feet. So very similar in size to the vacant parcel on North Randolph that was recently cleared. And you're going to have to use your imagination a little bit, but can you sort of visualize 8 units like this on that property? So that's kind of what we're talking about. Or that is exactly what we're talking about, not just kind of. So here we have, again, 4 would have been allowed on this particular property according to their underlying zoning district. And they were able to put 8 cottages in with a community room off on the left-hand side. And to give you a little bit better visual of what that looks like, that's the built project.
Hmm.
And this also has the driveway down the right-hand side where there's already a street. So there's a little bit more room on the North Randolph property to accommodate something like this. And there are size maximums on here. There's, I think, a 700 square foot maximum first floor footprint, and then another 250 for a loft. So we're still in that 900 some square foot range for dwelling sizes. They can only be a story and a half. And we see all the elements that we've already talked about. Parking is over to the side. We have common house with storage. I think there's 2 buildings are some storage lockers. So each person may not have enough storage in their house. They get some storage. They have that common area running down the middle.
I have a question. I think, but anyway, so this structure here that's closest to where Arnie is, right above, yeah, that one there. Is that, no, the other one. Is that the storage unit? Is that what you're saying?
I think the 2 things left and right, I believe, are their storage, and that's the common house where I think that they have a common kitchen and can share meals and all that. I can also look that up to provide you more detail on that particular one.
That almost looks like a house but I
Yeah.
can't tell.
It's certainly that same sort of footprint and massing. But that's in essence what we're talking about. It, you know, is this the type of thing that you would like to go forward with? We're talking about doubling the density roughly. Lots of things still have to be decided, mind you. Doubling the density, smaller cottages, common open area, vehicles off to the side.
Yeah.
Not being prominent anymore.
I'm curious about how the houses, so let's take that Randolph Street lot as an example. How would those houses, if there were however many this is, 7, 8, how would they relate to Randolph Street and that neighborhood? Because it's like you're having a neighborhood inside of a neighborhood. And I just, in terms of sort of that neighborliness, not just among your little set of cottage houses, but the bigger street. I'm not sure, I don't see that there's sort of a relationship with the street there.
I think it's no different than what we have up and down North Randolph Street now. In other words, a sidewalk, and you see the sidewalk extended in front of this project.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily open so that the community can just freely walk through and use this common area. This common area is really for the control, I think, of the folks that live there. But as far as the same sort of experience along the street, if I'm walking along the street, you have the same experience. So if I'm a neighbor in a single family detached larger house and somebody invites me over, then you just traverse the sidewalk and then you walk into their neighborhood if you're invited. So I think there is not that it's completely closed off and unfriendly, but I think it presents itself to the street just as any other development would.
I would beg to differ. I mean, you're talking about the side or the back of a house as opposed to a front house, front
Okay,
porch.
from that standpoint.
Right.
Yeah,
So you're
it-
walking by it and it's like, okay, that's different from there's a front porch and there's another front porch and there's another front porch. Oh, wait, this is the side of a house or the back of a house.
Yeah.
It looks like I can't quite tell.
Yeah, there's certainly some truth to that. But I think you could also potentially argue that somebody could put their house there and they could turn their back to your side and you could have that same situation even without this cottage style development. But
Really,
yeah,
a house does not have to front on the street?
well, no, you could design it in such a way, or if you're on a corner, somebody could be facing this onto the side street and then the back of the house be up against. So
Yeah.
as more dense we get, the more sort of issues like that
Right.
we're inevitably going to face. But
Yeah.
those can be handled through design. One other thing that maybe to mention here, these cottages are also set up in such a way that one side may not have windows on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the one next to it has windows. So then that interstitial space between the two ends up being the yard for the one house. So that's how you use design to sort of capture some space for one owner.
Right.
And that way they're not looking at such small units and so close together, they're not looking into each other's windows. So there's little design tricks that can be used for that type of thing.
Question of who gets the armrest.
Yeah,
That's right.
Everybody's going to get one armrest.
Yeah, exactly, right.
But it does actually, I think especially on Randolph Street, since that one I can picture, I think it actually does fit pretty well. Because you already have kind of these little streets built in that don't fit, Hillcrest is a nice little cul-de-sac that was pretty squeezed in there at one time. And there's lots of those little streets. And it looks like I think visually it'll fit pretty well with R1. But then when you get to R2, where you have more land and could actually do it, that's, I think, where you'll end up seeing more, it's not so cohesive looking, but yes, it'll be interesting when we get that deep into it, how we make it fit in all whatever neighborhoods we allow it.
And on Randolph in particular, you also have a lot of small houses directly across the street. So that, as you're getting, what you're getting to is, I'm not sure that this would be very dissimilar at all. Now, some of the ones further down are larger, but they're already in duplexes and multifamily. So this is just, I think we were fortunate that we have a property that's a potential, certainly not anything that the property owner has said, but we have something that is a potential, just, not too far from City Hall anyway. And this just happens to match up size wise. So I think it's a good representation of what this could be.
And that about, that's less than 1 acre, right? It's about 3/4 of an acre, those dimensions.
Well, one of
I was
these,
just doing it right now. If I did it right now. I don't know.
Third Street cottages are 0.66, so 2/3 of an acre. And the Randolph property is 0.8.
Yeah.
So some Randolph.
You don't need a full
slightly
acre.
larger.
You don't need a full acre to get 8 of these houses on.
It's pretty amazing.
Oh, go ahead.
No, my little query would be that path that goes down the middle. I don't know. Potentially somebody might say, oh, that's a private path. Nobody's allowed to walk on that.
Yeah, and I don't know how that would get treated, going back to Shannon's question as well. So if you're on the sidewalk up front, going down whatever the main
Right.
Third Street, presumably, is there a little gate that says, or I don't know how that gets
Yeah,
treated.
yeah.
But certainly you're transitioning, you're no longer in complete public space. You're entering somebody else's domain.
Because they're paying dues on that to maintain that. And I mean, just for example, I'm playing the devil's advocate here. Somebody walks their dog down there routinely and doesn't pick up, and then I could see where those people would be a little bit miffed.
And you're definitely on private property at that point.
Okay.
You're not on a
Okay.
public street anymore.
Yeah. It was, I think Shannon, I like that point, and it may be something we consider in our deliberations, is how does the development meet the public street? And that notion of this transition from public to semi-public space. When you walk down some larger cities, and remember in the old days, garden apartments that were U-shaped, you didn't go in there,
Right.
You kept going
Unless you were invited.
unless you're invited, but the apartments did relate to the public street at the same time. So you had this transition from public facing to semi-public. And I think that's a good point to bring up when we look at the design criterias or whatever we decide.
And if you're done with this one, we have another, I can't remember.
Oh, more surprises.
Because we had the question about Walker Street. So right at the corner of Walker and Houston, 250 by 125. So we were still in the same ballpark size wise. This one's a little bit smaller. But just to give you that sense of, this is Max's, and this is where Max was interested for this. And presumably he still is. So it might not have 8, maybe it's got set, just. So this is the one that we should definitely keep in mind. Overall, where minimum lot size and maximums and all that. But this is the one that's probably most likely going to be requesting a cottage housing development. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. And that's all I've got. Happy to answer any questions.
So that one is, it's the difference that I see on that is that there are no sidewalks on Walker Street. So it's less of a pedestrian zone there than it is on Randolph. But I can see how you could have a whole bunch of houses that backed, had their backs onto Walker Street. Yeah, I don't know.
I would be concerned with that area, for the cars parking. I mean, you're only talking one parking place per unit, and I don't know of any household that, if they've got 2 people in it, they usually have 2 cars. And there's no street parking there at all.
Yeah.
So that would be a concern.
It would definitely have to have some off-street parking. All of the examples we've seen have some sort of off-street parking.
Yeah, but I would say it need quite a bit of off-street parking.
That's sort of the calibration thing. That's how we even when we start pulling from someplace like Winchester, we still have to figure out what works for us, not just what worked.
Yeah.
Actually didn't work in Winchester, and I'll tell you why in the next meeting.
In Thornhill, they had the community, two different community garages. And then the 3 units had the under, and then there was enough individual parking spaces to get 2. But then, yeah, if you have company, because you're right, that especially that street.
Yeah,
Houston
that's
Street
really.
is just,
I think you could argue that if you're in a more urban area that has actual transit.
Yeah.
That maybe you can say, yeah, we can get by with 1 per unit, but we
Mhm.
might have to do some sort of multiplier, 1.5, maybe
Yeah.
2. Yeah,
Mhm.
something to think about.
we did with apartments.
But that's the point, is to have fewer cars, to have as few
Right.
cars as possible. And the Houston and Walker Street is right there. You can walk. It's for someone who wants to live in town
That's right.
and walk to the market. And if we're ever get around to having, making it easier to walk down, say, Miller Street and through and so forth, that's the whole idea, so that you can actually walk to Kroger.
Yep. Right.
And not take your life in your hands, because you won't be walking down Walker Street, because we can't ever put a sidewalk there because, right, the side limitations, but to make it so that you can walk and so that you only want one.
Right.
You know, if you're, so that's the idea, you know, and it's up to the developer. If the developer says, well, I think there are people who want to buy this, who want to just have one car, and, you know, make sure there's bike racks. I mean, you know, that's what we talked about before, you know, and e-bike racks and that kind of stuff. That's what we're looking for. So it's a different kind of mindset.
And I guess you don't normally see these with parking, like pull-in parking off of the street. Is that
Typically,
accurate?
these are trying to hide the parking from
Yeah.
public view, so that
Right.
they're tucking them into the sides or in the back if possible.
Right,
But the one on Thornhill had it up front, but there was a good bit of vegetation
Right.
showing, you know, as a screening.
Arnie, is there? This is a question we always ask at some point and when we set off on these ventures is, how many do we think we actually will do? And it's a hard question to answer, but it's one to keep in mind because sometimes we get so deep in the weeds on some of the design issues. And then we go, well, wait a minute, we're only going to get 2 of these. So, I don't know how we do it, but just to keep in perspective that,
I don't think we're getting too many.
no.
It just because it's different, it might be hard for financing to be gained for something like this.
So is there a minimum? That's what, in one of these, you know, they had a minimum lot.
I think we need to have a minimum
Yeah.
lot because you can't have a
Yeah.
community with 2 of these or, you know, 4 of these. I
Yeah.
think we need to set a minimum,
Hmm.
but with an understanding that a maximum also needs to be in place. So yeah,
Yeah.
those are definitely things that we need to go through. And now the overall number, it's like everything else in Lexington. We're not that big. We don't have that many opportunities for this. The 3 parcels that we had in the slideshow, I think, are the ones that are the most glaringly obvious. Of course, one owner hasn't shown any interest in. I don't know who owns the vacant one on Thornhill now. I think Mr. Waddell is clearly out of the picture because that's been so many years ago when he had an interest in that property. But there aren't that many opportunities here. And I really don't think that we're going to be in a situation where Atlanta or some other larger place where they start tearing down a house or 2 just to put these in. I don't think our market's going to be there for a long period of time.
Long time.
Where we start doing tear downs. So it's a good question, but I don't think it's going to be many more than a half a dozen or so, honestly.
But maybe because we are talking about it, it goes back to, if you look in that handout I gave under Seattle, Washington, they have lot sizes must be a minimum of 6,400 square feet for a minimum of 4 units. So there's an example of, well, then maybe that means that this could happen in more places than we're thinking of. So it's just, something to think about.
Mhm.
And the other thing we're going to have to think about is, as always, is how we're going to, once people start here, we're talking about this, how do we educate and bring people into the conversation so they don't get a misconception of what's going on.
Yeah.
Because I think there's already been some feeling of pushback in that neighborhood of people.
Mhm.
Some people have put up signs on that property on Houston Walker.
Oh,
Of, I don't know exactly what it says, but something about we don't want like lots of building here. We don't want multifamily dwellings. We don't want, they put it up. So there's people already sensing something's going to go on there and we don't like it. But, right. But that's generally how people are. So we got to make sure we give people all the opportunity to hear what's going on. And we probably want to, be targeted. And when we do it, when we start getting into substantive conversations, make sure that people around there know what's going on so they don't feel blindsided. And that's one of the things you see when you read about cottage housing online. They say, make sure you educate your community on what's going on so people don't, and be able to say, this is what we think will be the effect in terms of traffic and parking, and say, we're not thinking of adding 3 parking spaces per unit. It's not going to overwhelm, that sort of thing. So being proactive, and I think, when we've done chickens and did a lot of work on chickens, we probably spent longer on chickens than we're going to spend on this. And how many chickens are in the city of Lexington? Like actual chickens?
Right. Right.
Not how many? Very few, right? What do we got? 5 permits out there for them?
8. John asked us of me and we looked it up.
Well, one's gone. I know there's
Yeah, there's several that are gone.
Yeah.
We had up to 8 issued, and there aren't annuals, so they don't keep up. So they get a
Yeah.
permit, and if they stop, then we don't know.
No.
But
So there's
at
not many
most, we
chickens.
had 8 permits, and I know at least 2 or more likely that have stopped doing
Yeah.
it.
And
because-
everybody had their say. And by the time everybody was done, they're like, whatever, chickens, right? So we just got to make sure the process. That's good.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And then just back to what John was saying, I mean, it could just be a few lots, right? But even there, you're getting a non-trivial number of units and meeting goals that are really clearly articulated in the comp plan that we're committed to. And then when you think about the demographic trends that you were pointing to with just the changes in the sort of average structure of household formation in the US, and you think about this as a fairly new movement, those things could intersect in ways such that demand for housing like this could, over the incoming decades, change notably, right? And so it could be a small scale thing that is good for our community and for a few people, but it could end up being, more important than we imagine, I think. I'm quite excited about it.
Okay. So are we good for now? And you'll bring in when were you envisioning our next discussion, bring in the Winchester regulations?
It's an easy cut and paste, so it can be in your next meeting packet easily, right?
Is that good? And okay. And okay. I guess we did this, we didn't open the public comment. The staff report moved into the commission discussion, as it often does, because the chair doesn't pay attention to what's going on. So formally speaking, we should ask for public comment and close it. And that rounds that off for now. So we move on to other business. Arnie has said, with our great slide presentation here, no zoning and planning report.
Can I ask you a question, even though you don't have an official report? ARB, did they discuss a accessory dwelling unit at the last meeting? Did y'all have a meeting last Thursday? Oh, okay. Somebody said that was on the, and have you
Had 2 new structures, but neither one of them were detached.
yeah.
It won't qualify as a PD.
Oh, it won't. Oh, okay.
His initial design of that months ago included a full separate unit. So yes, it would have required a conditional use permit, but he has since changed that, not just to get around the ADU requirements. He rethought his whole program because that mother-in-law bedroom space is really close to the kitchen that's in the house. So he didn't see the need to create a whole separate kitchen. So it's not a complete separate dwelling unit.
Okay, so no, you haven't received any applications for ADUs yet? Okay.
I've had some inquiries from architects, but haven't had an application. Now, I think one of them in particular is going to was thinking about a detached, but they're going to do an attached, not just to get around the CUP, but just because it made more sense on the property. but there have been a couple of inquiries, but no applications have been submitted for a detached accessory dwelling unit.
Okay, thanks. I was looking forward to ones coming up.
All that work.
Right.
And key annual PC milestones, work on the cottage housing, and there's nothing else to be said on the other items, right? So this is our main project. Next, okay. Any applications that you know of for our next meeting, anything?
Yeah.
Correct. He's coming back in the second. Yeah. So yeah, nothing.
Okay. all right.
I didn't understand what the, not confusion's not the right word, what the, point of, making that another, request on his part. For,
The old
because-
courthouse.
yeah,
issue
for the
and
courthouse.
Why he was
the
deferring it?
fees. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that.
Sorry, I'm not
So
understanding.
what did he find that it complicated slightly the
The-
question of the meeting rooms?
We
and so
have
forth?
conditional use permits that, it's not uncommon here to have conditional use permits that are only for a certain period of time
Right.
and they need to be reviewed so
Right.
that we can have oversight over them to make sure that they're not causing issues.
Mhm.
But this one had a 15-year deadline, and I thought because it needed to have a deadline so it could be reviewed again and then reviewed and analyzed and then approved again, and then off it goes. But this one in the deed, the deed restriction said that the community space only had to be available for 15 years.
Okay.
So that's the new information.
Okay.
And then there's also a lot going on with the property in the sense of what's going on outside, not inside, but outside, and how it's getting configured. So I think he just wanted to regroup and consider what's happening as an overall piece. And then he'll come back the second meeting in May and continue that conditional use permit request.
He will still have to have that, considered then. Okay.
He has some decisions to make on what to bring forward to us.
Yeah.
I think that's fair to say.
Okay.
Because it's no longer required by the deed.
But if he continues the use, it still requires a conditional use permit or uses, depending on which one he chooses.
All right. Has the city council been up to anything?
We've been trying to stay out of trouble, but been busy. We had a meeting last Thursday and it was Jim Hallis's last meeting with us.
Oh.
He has been here for almost 5 years now and done a wonderful job. And now he's taking a well-deserved vacation and he officially retires on April 30th. And in the interim, we have appointed Jen Bell as the interim city manager, and she'll serve until Tom Carroll gets here, our new city manager. And right now he's expecting to come about May 20th, sometime between May 20th and June 1st. So we're in good hands and really will miss Jim, but he's staying in the community. So you will see him around, I'm sure. He will stay very active. We also adopted the 2025 budget and the CIP, and it is still on our agenda. And we haven't taken any action to consider the echelon request for abatement. Just to give you a little update, Jen Bell, Jim Hallis, David Sigler, and I met with the echelon representatives on Monday and just got more information basically. And we'll have what will likely happen. I don't get to make this decision, but I am guessing what will happen is that our next council meeting, we'll have a closed session and update council on what happened or what information we got. Nothing's happened. And then I would expect that either at the second May meeting or the first June meeting, and maybe both, that we'll talk about it in public session. But I would also guess that we would talk about it one meeting and not take action until the next meeting. So I think timing wise, they would like to just know sooner rather than later because it affects whether they can do the project at this time or not. And for us, we may decide with Tom starting just to wait till he gets here or not, since Jen has been through the whole process. So I can't tell you what, but we will talk about it soon. I'm not sure which meeting. And that's all I have unless there's any question.
Okay. All right. One last thing before I call for a motion to adjourn. I am going to not be re-upping for planning commission when my term is up in July. So, one of the reasons is the Classical Association of Virginia, which is Association of High School and College Professors of Classics and Latin and Greek. I'm going to be becoming the president of that organization for the next 2 years. And that's going to take up a good bit of my time. And there's a lot of work to do there. And so I think I need to step away from this. So I'll be done. I'll probably be done in June because I'm going to be away in July. So if you know anybody, they don't merely have to live on Taylor Street. That's how Pat Mayercheck lived in the house that Shannon now lives in, and he recruited me. I didn't recruit Shannon, but she's in the planning commission house there. So they can live anywhere in the city, not just Taylor Street. So start looking around, I guess.
Have you done it 8 years or?
8 years and 2 months. I did the
Wow,
last
yeah.
2 or 3 months of Pat's term.
Right. Oh,
Um,
that's
and
good.
I was made to apply there. I had to ask in Latin. I was, I think Camille Miller made me ask in Latin because I had taught Latin to a relative of every person up on the days, I think. So,
And
that's not required, but
is
that's,
that a national organization?
no,
that you're
that's
gonna chair?
Virginia, Classical
Virginia? Oh,
Association
good.
of Virginia.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
National organization is next.
No,
Right,
yeah. So that's it. So I will not be finishing up. Okay, so that's it. Unless you want to talk about the Classical Association of Virginia all night, I would recommend that somebody,
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
I adjourned.
I'd like to make a moment to be sad that Pat is leaving.
Yeah.
He's
Get
been,
on the record, we're adjourned. That doesn't.
I know, I can't say anything now.